Hello, Jamie. Welcome to the True Story Project. We are going to have a very interesting, I hope, conversation on your visit here in Romania. Today we have with us Jamie Shea, who used to be Deputy Secretary General for Emerging Challenges at NATO until the end of 2018. And probably even more famously, you were the spokesperson for NATO during the 1999 Kosovo War, which must have been a very, very challenging job, I'm sure. Jamie has been for a day in Romania today, paying different visits, meeting with different people after a few years of absence from Romania, if I'm not mistaken. We'll talk about Romania in a second, Jamie, but I do want to ask you a question, which you also asked during your visits today, one of your visits today and your discussions today. You know NATO in and out. You know the security challenges. You know the threats out there. What keeps you awake at night?
Well, I think it's really, Alina, managing complexity. When I first joined NATO during the Cold War, life was relatively simple. The focus was on Germany, it was the military strength of the Soviet Union, but it was one problem in one place at one time. So you had the luxury of being able to think at length about that problem, devote all of your intelligence, all of your military resources to that one particular spot. Today, the problem is that NATO is dealing with a multitude of different challenges. It's dealing, for example, with a resurgent Russia in the east. It's dealing with the terrorists, the jihadists, and all of the instabilities in the Middle East and North Africa. It's also now dealing with what we call hybrid warfare, the destabilization activities of foreign powers, trying to get inside our election campaigns, trying to deliver fake news, trying to use cyber attacks to destabilize our societies. And so it's a more complex world, and you can't just deal with one challenge. You have to deal with a multitude. And of course, different allies have different priorities. If you're in France, then North Africa, Mali, the Sahel is the key area. If you're in Italy, you're looking at Libya. If you're in Turkey, you're thinking Syria. If you're in Poland, of course, you're thinking very much the challenge of Russia. And so NATO has to be able to deal with three fronts: front east, front south, and the internal hybrid front. Now that's difficult, but what makes it even more complicated is, of course, you need different strategies, because the tanks that you need in the east are not very useful when you're dealing with cyber attacks. The nuclear deterrence that's good in the east doesn't get you very far when you're dealing with jihadists in the vast expanses of Mali or the Central African Republic or Burkina Faso or wherever. So you need to take a different approach in those three areas, while keeping all of your allies happy that, yes, you are devoting enough time and attention to their particular problem. So I think I'd call it this challenge of managing a much more complicated world and providing security to everybody at the same time.
Does the future of the alliance keep you awake at night? Do you worry that the alliance, given all these tensions and given different factors going in different ways, given some countries which are going towards isolationism, do you worry that the alliance will not hold? Do you worry about the future of the alliance?
Well, it's certainly under a lot more stress than what we've seen for a while, because you have, obviously in the United States, a US President, Donald Trump, who is now much more demanding when it comes to burden sharing. US is doing too much, the Europeans are doing too little, and he wants now to rebalance the alliance, which means that the Europeans have to spend more on defense and take more responsibility. So that's a challenge. There is the worry that in the long term, the United States may rededicate its resources to the Pacific region, and Europe will be left much more on its own in dealing with all of the problems in this area. So keeping the Americans on board, I think, is one particular challenge. Next problem, of course, is the internal cohesion of NATO. If you have countries that start deviating from democratic norms, of no longer good democracies, no longer hold free and fair elections, no longer treat their media fairly, then of course the problem is that NATO no longer comes across globally as a liberal democratic community, and other countries, Australia, Sweden, Finland, may wake up and say, no, we don't really want to cooperate with that organisation if it's no longer democratic. So holding the internal standards is perhaps even more important than spending a lot of money on defence. And then there's this thing I mentioned a moment ago. When you're trying to be all things to all people all the time, juggling a lot of different balls missiles in the air. The danger is you satisfy nobody. You know, Poland may think, well, we don't have enough tanks. The French may say, well, there's not enough rapid reaction forces coming to support us in Mali.
Deterrence.
Others may think, well, I've just had a cyber attack, and where was NATO in my moments of crisis? So it is a challenging time. But historically, NATO has gone through many challenging times in the past. Some of these debates, like the American complaints on burden sharing, are not really new. And NATO has this kind of miraculous ability to bounce back and to reform itself, to transform itself. Another panel of experts is going to be nominated soon in NATO to look at the next round of transformation. And funnily enough, you know, when there is a sort of a crisis moment, as we've seen in the past, you know, when France left the integrated structure under General de Gaulle, or when we had the period of détente in the 1960s, and we had to balance talking to the Soviets with deterring the Soviets. Even after 1989, when NATO seemed to vote itself out of existence because the old enemy collapsed, NATO's got this funny habit of being able to reinvent itself and bounce back. And sometimes, if you look at what is actually happening, rather than what people are saying, it's a much more positive story. You know, for example, you hear Donald Trump criticizing the Europeans on defense spending, but every day, you know, American troops are flying over to Europe, 20,000 at the moment for a big exercise called Defender Europe. They're going up to the Baltic states, they're practicing deterrence, they're building the infrastructure. And so, you know, if you look at what NATO does rather than what people say about it, it's a more positive picture.
You're coming to Romania after a few years of absence, as I just mentioned, and you have met with officials, with experts, with people from the business community. What was the biggest lesson you learned about Romania today? Something that you weren't aware of, and it either comes as a surprise, probably even as a shock, but something that you're taking away from this trip.
Well, I think it's a much more self-confident and active Romania, which is a good sign. I mean, when I first came here in the 90s, the topic was, when do we join NATO and when do we get protection? It was all about what the others are going to do for us, much more than what we Romanians are going to do for the rest of the world. And I think one of the positive developments is that now that Romania has been in NATO for many years already, and of course has joined the EU, it's now a more self-confident country. It's thinking more actively and more creatively about how do we partner with Poland so that, for example, we join the NATO forces in the Baltic area more with the NATO forces in the Black Sea area and see the whole thing as a single region. How do we find industrial partners elsewhere who are going to work with us on our new defence programmes to regenerate our activity? How do we create new command structures on our territory so that we can have a more persistent presence of other NATO countries? How can we reach out even sometimes to difficult partners like Turkey, where relations have not always been smooth, but to build more confidence and have Turkish forces, for example, coming to exercise here. So I think what's impressed me is that it's a much more Romania that wants to stand on its own 2 feet, conduct its diplomacy, be active, be present, and not simply sit back and say, who's going to come and help me and solve my problems for me? So psychologically, the mood is different. You find that. And it's very positive because it's more self-confident and it's looking more towards the future. And realizing that Romanians also have to find Romanian solutions to their own problems. You know, as we say in my country, the UK, God helps those that help themselves.
So you live in Brussels, and you're obviously very well networked within the security experts, officials in Brussels, and not only. Would you say that the image of Romania that you saw today coming here is the same that the one you perceived in Brussels before your visit here?
No, I generally think that the Romanian image in Brussels is a good one. For example, Romania has sent its finest diplomats and officials abroad, and they're highly professional, they're well respected. Some of the most formidable women that I worked for and with at NATO are Romanian. The quality of the people I don't think has ever been in doubt, and I think, you know, that person-to-person issue does a lot. For example, the current NATO Deputy Secretary General, which is the second highest position in the alliance, is the former Foreign Minister, Mircea Jonar, who's well known. He's an accomplished diplomat, and the fact that Romania is now able to occupy those very senior positions, I think, says a lot about the credibility of the country. So people power does matter. Secondly, I think Romania is a country which is at ease both in the EU and NATO. I wish that my own country, the UK, would have been at ease in the EU.
Not the case anymore?
Yes, not the case, unfortunately, anymore, as it is in NATO. And therefore, when you get these two massive debates that we're facing at the moment, which is the traditional transatlantic debate about how do we keep the Americans engaged and keep NATO the traditionally strong alliance, vis-a-vis what President Macron of France is saying, which is, no, well, we can't really depend on those Americans any longer. So how do we build up a more coherent European defence union based around the European Union and Europe developing its own defence and technology base? Those are the two big debates. And when you look around, the countries of Europe who are in both camps and who can act as the bridge and the reconcilers rather than being in one camp shooting at the other camp, I think Romania is in a unique position. And I think that this does actually offer Romania a very ambitious foreign policy perspectives to play an even larger role in the future if it can do it wisely and adroitly. I think the other thing, and this is of course what we are working on with the Atlantic Black Sea Security Forum here in Bucharest in March, is that Romania is making everybody much more aware of the importance of the Black Sea as an important sort of crossing point of all of the big strategic issues we're facing. Russia, Crimea, Russian military power, Russia projecting power within the region towards the Middle East and Libya and North Africa, the importance of the region for energy security, with new pipelines being built and new trading relations. I was very interested to learn, which I should have known, but the Constanța is now the third or fourth largest port in the European Union, which I think testifies to that. The importance of China coming in with investments, filling a vacuum if Europeans and Americans don't fill that vacuum. The whole issue of hybrid warfare, which of course is impacting on Romania and its domestic politics like it is elsewhere. So many of the big themes of European security come together in this particular region, and that presents challenges for Romania, but it also presents opportunities.
So what would be the most important or pressing challenge when it comes to security for Romania?
Well, I think obviously what we do about the Black Sea is going to be important because obviously it's a vital lifeline of Europe. It also connects Turkey and Romania and Bulgaria across the Black Sea, so it's the link between that part of the alliance and the EU and the more Central European part. It's our link with important partners like Georgia or Ukraine that have helped NATO in Afghanistan and in the Balkans and in our exercises, and they have the membership prospect. So how could Ukraine or Georgia ever join NATO in the future if the Black Sea becomes a Russian lake and is completely lost to NATO in terms of its ability to project power into the region? The Black Sea is vital for trading, for energy links, as I mentioned. There are also environmental issues which are important. So my sense is that the key challenge that we face is coming up with some kind of framework which will give Russia its place, yes, but will also preserve some kind of role for NATO forces in that area. And if we could, later on, not make the Black Sea a zone of confrontation, but a zone of cooperation where we could build confidence measures, for example, with Russia and have ability to de-escalate. So at a time when Russia clearly is trying to push us out of the Black Sea by designating large areas as exclusive for its exercises, or trying to impair freedom of navigation, or using sort of hostile tactics like flying very low over ships or coming very close to force us out of the Black Sea. I think how we work with Romania to develop a non-confrontational but nonetheless firm policy of saying, no, we're here, we have every right to be here and we're here to stay. I think that's going to be, to my mind, the number one challenge. The second challenge is that as NATO looks at a reinforcement strategy from west to east, bringing in forces from the United States, the UK, back to Europe, that we don't only develop a west-east axis, just one road, which means we can only go to the Baltic states, we can't go to anywhere else. We have to look at, how events in one area could impact very quickly on events into another area. Russia clearly could swing in 24 hours, from a strategy of putting pressure on the Baltics to putting pressure on Bulgaria or Romania in this region. And just like Russia can swing the center of gravity quickly, NATO also has to be able to swing the center of gravity in a defensive way. And that means that we have to join up to very distinct sectors which have been treated differently in NATO. The Baltic sector and the Black Sea sector, where we talk about enhanced forward presence here and tailored presence there, different language, different concepts, and gradually fuse them into one single Eastern European zone, which are truly joined up and which have the ability, south-north, north-south, to change military forces, to change the balance very, very quickly if need be. So we need a south-north, north-south axis and not just a west-east, east-west
Which
axis.
is the concept of the eastern flank, and this in a certain respect, and this is where Poland and Romania cooperate very, very closely with the Baltic countries as well to push for the interests of the countries on the eastern flank. So to a certain extent, this is being addressed somewhat.
Indeed, but it's, I think, very important, not just to make this a dialogue of the countries themselves, and it's good that Romania and Poland have developed the 3 Cs initiative, which is starting a dialogue here. It's very good that the bilateral cooperation is so good, but I think that the forum that I mentioned, the Atlantic Black Sea Security Forum at the end of March, is a good opportunity to bring the broader community here to educate and to make people more aware, and also develop more ideas and practical thinking, because if we're talking about switching power, that's not just the Polish army and the Romanian army. It also means the British, German, French, American troops, the Canadians who are now coming with their aircraft to Romania for air policing in the second half of this year. We need everybody to come to the table on this one, and so it's good that you're taking the lead, but we also need to make sure it's seen as a NATO responsibility and not just a responsibility of the regional countries themselves.
You mentioned the Atlantic Black Sea Security Forum, which is going to take place on March 26, organized by the German Marshall Fund and the Aspen Institute. And we talked a little bit about the challenges, even opportunities I kind of sensed from your discourse that could be discussed and will be discussed there. You'll obviously come for that forum, so you'll be back here in Romania again. Do you think any major event can actually happen between now and March 26 that should be discussed at the forum?
Well, clearly we've had a lot which has been happening in the last few weeks and months. There's the new geopolitical commission and how it's going to make that geopolitics felt not just in the Balkans or in the East or in Libya, but also what does a geopolitical commission mean for the Black Sea region. They've done some thinking in Brussels, and this is going to be, as we say in English, trotted out or presented between now and March the 26th.
That's another opportunity for
100
Romania.
days, and I think we want to hear from some of these people. Okay, what does it mean? The words sound fine, but what does it particularly mean? I think that is going to be a key thing. I mean, for example, in the United States, we were going through the primaries, so by March the 26th, we may have we will be past Super Tuesday, right? And I think, therefore, we're going to have a clearer sort of idea about who is going to represent the Democrats in the election, and now it's time to start influencing their platform and in the United States. And so I think it's also a good opportunity to take stock of how some of these ideas can be obviously also inserted into the US presidential campaign, where foreign policy and the commitment to Europe, I think, is going to matter as well. So that is also a milestone, particularly with our desire, your desire, Alina, to secure quite high-level US participation, the Atlantic Black Sea Security Forum. So I think that will be something that we will be looking at as well quite closely. We'll also see by March the 26th what the prospects are for a peace process in the Ukraine, where tragically at the moment the fighting seems to be restarting. We'll be moving ahead to the next meeting of the Normandy Group, and I think also, given the centrality of the Ukraine to the entire Black Sea concept, what prospects there are for Ukraine now to develop in a more serene way and obviously defuse the conflict in the Donbass will be something I think will be on the agenda as well. Tragically also, probably the end game is Syria by March the 26th. It looks as if if Assad, with Russian help, is about to sort of wipe out the last pocket of the resistance movement in Idlib, and I think having a discussion on where Russia is going to be after Syria. Russia will be looking to the Western countries to come in and rebuild the place with $300 billion minimum of investments required. And given that situation, what attitude do we take in terms of where we go now in that region more broadly? NATO, of course, is trying by March the 26th to have some clarity too on how it is going to ramp up its presence in Iraq. Romania is going to be called upon to send more trainers as part of that effort, and I think there'll be a little bit more clarity by then as to what exactly NATO is looking for in terms of how many extra troops for how long, and so yes, I think we'll look at the Black Sea, but I've got a sort of feeling that some of the broader issues like Ukraine, the Donbass,
spill over.
The Syrian issue, the Libyan issue, those will exactly find their way onto the agenda as well.
Well, quite a very, very full agenda. Thank you very much, Jamie. You will be, of course, coming back, as I said, for the forum on the 26th. And you'll be coming back to our little studio to again discuss these events, maybe others. Let's hope no black swans until the March 26th. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thank you, Alina.